Welcome to the course Succession Planning. The approach will work with will be competency-based approach. This is a succession planning DIY do-it-yourself. For this course, our learning areas will be scenario planning, identifying competencies, identifying mission critical positions, identifying potential successors, conducting gap analysis, creating readiness plan, monitoring and tracking and reporting, then repeating the cycle. For the purpose of learning, the company we'll be using for this purpose will be a dummy organization that goes by the name HMP Pharmacy Retail Chain. Now, from the overview we have concerning this pharmacy retail chain, HMP is a registered pharmaceutical retail chain with over 100 pharmacies across the country. The front end of the business is the pharmacy, which is supported by back-end operations such as supply chain and logistics, IT, quality assurance, HR, finance, etc. The average pharmacy comprises of 2 pharmacists and 2 health technicians. These 4 professionals keep the pharmacy running. Oversight of the pharmacy chain is performed by a special unit responsible for retail operations. This team comprises of experienced pharmacists who have moved from managing a pharmacy to overseeing a collection of pharmacies at different occasions. Part of the strategic objectives of HMP Pharmacy Retail Chain is to aggressively grow its pool of pharmacies to 500 by year 2030. This plan is in active motion, and as such, HR is required to play an active role through the readiness of suitable talents. So this gives us an overview of what HMP Pharmacy is all about, and top line introduction into the strategic direction of the company. The next thing we want to do in the process of coming up with a succession plan is to look into scenario planning. Now, when it comes to succession planning, not everybody will think the route of scenario planning, because at the end of the day, people are likely to tell you that, we're not talking about strategic workforce planning. However, because of the many benefits that scenario planning brings to the table, I think it's very, very important. I think it will be useful for you to have different scenarios. With this, you can project into the future as to what can happen. So, in thinking of different scenarios for HMP and as far as the future holds within the market of play, one of the scenarios throws up what we have, that business of bricks and mortar retail shop will be threatened. People will be held indoors due to a pandemic and will not be able to visit the pharmacy. So because of this, customers will depend on being able to consult with their pharmacist virtually. They want to virtually visit the pharmacy, successfully shop for products, and have it delivered to their doorsteps. Now, what this shows is that this might really be a depart from the business model of HMP Pharmacy Retail Chain, because if there's going to be a pandemic which will make people stay indoor and wouldn't want to go out, what it means is that there might be some extensive defeat or challenge with bricks and mortar retail shop, because everything now will be held or will happen virtually. So this is a scenario. Now, with this scenario, coupled with other things, we'll go into identifying competencies that will be required for HMP pharmacy for the purpose of the future. Now, before we go to identifying competencies, I think it's important that one touches base on how to go about scenario planning. You could have a group of people in groups, not less than 3, and have them focus on different things in terms of, there's going to be a disruption as far as our market is concerned. There's going to be a mild change. Business will be as usual with another group. and provide them with resource, with your strategy, extract of your strategy that you think will be useful. Research about macro and micro industry specific research. So let them sit down in their groups and think of the future and think of what can happen within the industry. With that, you will have at least nothing less than 3 different scenarios. So, for instance, if that was the approach adopted by HMP Pharmacy, comes one of this scenario which says that bricks and mortar will be threatened for a period due to pandemic. Okay, so from our scenario for HMP Pharmacy, in looking close and reviewing this particular scenario, it shows that there are some competencies that HMP will require in order to be ready for the future to come. Competencies required in this instance will be systems thinking. I mean, how do you think from the start to the end of a system? Because obviously there's going to be some sort of disruption in the way HMP services are customers, right from how you get the goods in to getting it to your pharmacy store and then the customers getting the products. So system thinking is a competency that needs to be built. Innovation, because there's going to be a disruption. There's going to be a disruption in terms of the bricks and mortar operations. Bulk of the sales activities will happen online, so there is need for innovation. Now, these are select competencies identified from this scenario, which speaks to the future. We'll further look at other means or channels or places you need to look into in identifying competencies for the organization while trying to come up with your succession plan. The identification of competencies in the design of succession plan is very, very important. So when it comes to identifying the right competencies, there are some areas you need to look into. First and foremost, the vision of the company is very, very important. The mission of the company is also very, very important. You need to look at the values of the company. Most organizations do have some values that they've identified. Now, those values are just not statements. They are statements that would help to propel the actualization of the vision and the mission of the company. Then the future. Now, what does the future look like? What is the future saying? Now, this future is a bit that you tie with the scenario that we've talked about earlier on. So if you look at these 4 areas mentioned here, for vision, the competency, an example of a competency for vision, maybe by the time you look at the vision for HMP Pharmacy, a competency identified could be professionalism. Now, when you look at the mission statement for HMP Pharmacy, the competency identified there is excellence. When you look at the values, the area of values, sometimes organizations have as much as 5 values. When you look at them closely, there are some competencies. Now, it's very, very important that each of these these values are defined, because it is only when these values are defined that you can easily spot, okay, what these are the competencies we need to build to ensure that we live these values, to ensure that we live the proper behaviors required to propel these values. So from the value statement of HMP Pharmacy, we can say that planning was identified as a competency, communication, accountability. And from the future, if you remember our discourse of this scenario, we identified 2 competencies, which is innovation and system thinking. Now, these are the competencies that are required for HMP Pharmacy retail chain. Now, each of these competencies, each of them needs to be defined into proficiencies. You need to define them into proficiency levels. Now, once you've defined them into proficiency levels, you try as much as possible to map competencies to your internal system. Now, what does this mean? let's take for instance planning. Now, when you look at planning, you try to give a description within the context of your company to say, okay, this is what planning means to us. Now, once this is what planning means to us, at different degrees, what does planning mean? So there could be a basic interpretation of planning, there could be an advanced interpretation of planning, there could be an intermediate interpretation of planning, and there will be an expert interpretation of planning, depending on the number of proficiencies you are looking at. Once this is done, you can also identify acceptable behaviors and non-acceptable behaviors, because from there you can even come up with a behavioral manual for your people. Now, that's not the essence of this training. Then once you have all these competencies defined, you need to now map them to your grading system to say, okay, for someone who is at so grade level, when it comes to planning, this is the level of proficiency expected of you when it comes to planning. Now, my recommendation for you to build a competency framework, because at the end of the day, what we're discussing about here is going to be a competency framework. I would recommend that you visit gapmetrics.com to build your competencies. On this platform, you can easily build your competencies with click of buttons, while also consulting in-house to know what a competency should entail. The next thing we'll do is once you've defined your competencies, the next thing you want to do is to identify your mission critical positions. All right, it is time to identify mission critical positions or mission critical roles. Now, all roles or jobs within organizations are important. However, within the strategic direction of a business over a period of time, there are some roles that are very critical. And within the context of the business, as the case will also be, there are some roles that are constantly important. So it's very, very important we know this. Now, for HMP pharmacy retail chain, after looking at the different job portfolios within the organization, we've been able to identify some roles that are mission critical to the company. A tool has been designed for this purpose, which you can also have access to. So for HMP pharmacy retail chain, for example, we're looking at superintendent pharmacy, pharmacist, health technician, inventory planning manager, warehouse manager, and project manager. Now, these are mission critical roles that was derived after deploying the tool designed for the purpose of identifying mission critical roles. So in your organization, when you're working on this, one of the ways you can look at it is to just get your organogram and have it laid out, and people who understand the business, who know more about the business, the direction of the business, are aware of the strategy, can easily just identify, these are the jobs that will take us there within the next 3-5 years. So that's one way of doing it. And but for the purpose of objectivity and some process to identifying this role, the tool has been designed, like I mentioned, that you can have access to. Now, once you've identified your mission critical roles, you want to identify your potential successors. However, before we go there, it's important that you take this process very serious, because it's not just about individuals now, it is about the jobs. So you don't want to just start picking, this person, because this person occupies that job, then it should be a mission critical role. No, it is the value that the job brings to the table within the context of your strategy and the strategic direction of your business that makes it a mission critical role. Don't forget this. Alright, it's time to identify potential successors. Now, who are potential successors? These are individuals that needs to be prepared for those critical roles when the need arises. Probably for one reason or the other, the incumbent of such roles or jobs gets to leave the jobs, maybe for other jobs within the organization, or decides to exit the business. Now, there are different ways of going about this. Two popular ones I will discuss in the course of this course. The first one here is the 9-box. With the 9-box, you look at the potentials of the individuals and the prospects and aspirations of the organization, and the performance level of these individuals. Now, when it comes to performance and potentials, some individuals might be doing well now, but when you look at potentials, probably they are already at their peak. In terms of the future and where the business wants to get to, they might not fit into the scope of what is to come. And while there are also some people who at the moment performance might be average or moderate, but in terms of potentials, they have what it takes, the zeal, the energy to be in the future, to be in the picture of the future. Now, within the 9-box, you might want to focus your strengths or your lens on the boxes 1B and 1A. 1B is good performance and high potentials. So that means of date, the person has got good performance and has got high potentials. 1A, outstanding performance and high potential. As a matter of fact, for 1A, these kind of individuals are those you identify as stepping. With stepping, that means they are almost there to take on the identified mission critical role that has been mapped to them. Now, when you compare these two, the individual and these two, these two I mean the potentials and the performance, the individual identified and mapped to a critical role is fit to be prepared for those roles, and it won't be a waste in the long run. So we will also look at the second approach at identifying successors or potential successors for organizations. Now, probably it's also important to state at this juncture that the use of potential is very, very important, because for the fact that someone is being mapped as a successor does not mean or does not guarantee that indeed the individual is going to get the job. No. What you're just doing is to get individuals ready and to keep developing your workforce for any eventuality in the future. All right. The second approach for identifying successors, potential successors, is for each mission critical role identified, a group of permit me to use the word wise men will be identified to form a committee for each group and for each mission critical role. Now, this committee will be, as part of the many things that they will do, each member of the committee will be required to submit a list of recommended potential successors for the mission critical role that they've been assigned to. So if, for instance, you identified a pharmacy like HMP, pharmacy retail chain, we identified a superintendent pharmacist as a mission critical role, and we now formed a committee of 4 people for the mission critical role superintendent pharmacist. Now, each member of this succession committee for superintendent pharmacy are expected to submit 3 names each. So by the time you multiply 3 by 4, it gives you 12. So in all, we have 12 names. It's also important to state that in this committee, the incumbent of the mission critical role is also a part of the committee, because during the course of the meetings, the talent reviews by the committee, the incumbent would also be shedding more light into the role and the requirements of the role and what the future holds for the role, so that all of this will be put into consideration to decide on who should be a potential successor for the mission critical role. Now, by the time you have these 12 names, now this committee will sit down and look at the entirety of the 12 names, and from there prune. So, for instance, what we have here is HMP. From HMP, we have 12 names. Now, from that 12 names, what it means is that there's a likelihood that at the end of the first meeting of the committee, 6 names might be derived. So once these 6 names are derived, then the facilitator, if I can put it like that, the person who is coordinating the whole process, can go back and then do further research, insight into these 6 people, and put together a pack for the second stage of the discourse. There are instances whereby the discussion goes beyond the second stage, where there is a deadlock and there is also need for further investigation about the individual. By and large, at the end of the different meetings, the committee will agree in terms of who should be among the potential successors. So, in the last meeting where agreement is reached, if at the end of the day 3 names are derived, those 3 names will be ranked. You have number 1, number 2, number 3. Most often, number 1, oftentimes, is always the step-in option, the preferred step-in candidate, meaning that this person is almost there and can easily just move into that position if anything happens today. However, that does not mean such individual should not be also involved in a readiness development process. So this is the second phase and the second approach to identifying potential successors. Remember, using the 9th box, or you're going through the route of committee and any other innovation you can bring to the table as far as this is concerned. Now, after identifying the potential successors, the next thing you want to do is to go into gap analysis. All right. In conducting gap analysis, I think there's something we need to quickly understand. What does gap analysis, what does it entail? Just from the word gap, what are the gaps? This is where you need to be, this is where you are, and this is the gap. Knowing full well that this is the gap, how do we go about closing the gap? So you remember that we did work on competencies. In the case of HMP pharmacy, some pool of competencies were identified. Now, those competencies most often become the core competencies of the organization and leadership competencies. So here you look at, because the competencies have been defined across proficiency levels, and benchmarks have been set for those roles in alignment with the grading system within the business. So you compare the expectation, the benchmark across these competencies with what this individual are being identified as a potential successors possesses. So, for instance, in the case of HMP, a superintendent pharmacist has been identified as a potential successor for a particular mission critical role. Now, as far as the core competencies of HMP is concerned, as far as the technical competencies required for that mission critical role is concerned, as far as the leadership competencies are concerned, to what degree does the superintendent pharmacist have in terms of the competencies identified? To carry out this assessment, you have the 360-degree appraisal system. You have personality assessment, MBTI, You can also carry out technical assessments, different assessments, to be assured that you have a thorough understanding. You thoroughly spot the gap as far as this potential successor is concerned. Now, for your competencies, I did recommended you using gapmetrics.com. You can also use gapmetrics for scheduling your 360-degree appraisal within the context of your already designed competency framework. So try to visit Gap Matrix to explore the platform itself. Now, with this, you can easily identify where the gaps are as far as your potential successors are concerned. Now, once you've identified the gaps, the next thing you want to do is to move into readiness plan. Alright, so at the moment we have all the gaps, we've identified the gaps. So the big question here is, how do we close those gaps? How do we ensure that these gaps are closed within record time? So now that is what readiness plan entails, action plan. Now, you have an individual who is currently on a particular job, but that individual has been identified for another job which is much higher than where the person is, and from the gap analysis it shows that there are deficits, there are areas that needs or requires improvement. So what interventions are we likely to introduce that would ensure that this person closes the gap in the most in the fastest time? And there's a beauty to gap analysis, because by the time you carry out your gap analysis, it also reveals some things to you. You might discover that in some instances you might not have the luxury of time to build your people to that level of acceptance. So in that instance, you might be thinking of probably buying, meaning hiring from the outside, or borrowing, maybe getting it outsourced or outsourced to your organization. So you need to take those decisions at that point in time. But when it comes to readiness plan, there are some different interventions that you can think of in respect to the areas of focus when it comes to where the gaps are and how you want to go about closing them. Different interventions like mentoring, getting someone who is proficient in that area to mentor those individuals, coaching, rotation, working on projects, classroom learning, etc. Now, there's a template designed for this purpose to help you properly plot the kind of intervention you would need to look into or consider for the purpose of closing a particular gap within the organization. All right, it's time to start monitoring and tracking and then reporting on our plan, or what's the essence of a plan without it being tracked or monitored. So you have a pool of talents within your succession matrix. Quite a lot of people across the organization being prepared for different roles for different periods at different time. So you need to have a metric, a chart that shows what you are tracking, how people are moving from one level to the other, the degree of improvement, and the setbacks and all of those things. So that's the essence of metrics and tracking. A template has been created for this purpose, some areas of focus as far as metrics is concerned, and how you can deploy the purpose of the tracker. You can have access to this. The next thing we quickly need to talk about will be the repeat cycle. Before we talk about the repeat cycle, permit me to quickly introduce you to the editable template on succession planning on femiojomo.com. All the templates that has been referenced in this course, you can easily have access to them on the website femiojomo.com. You can just go there and subscribe. Different templates created on the platform for your use. Right, so repeat cycle. Planning is a continuous process, a continuous activity, and when it comes to succession planning, it has to be a cycle. It's not something you just do and you feel, oh, that should last us for eternity. As a matter of fact, you should have a calendar for reviewing mission critical roles, continuous identification of high potential individuals. We currently live in a time where the workplace, as far as talent is concerned, is volatile, it's uncertain, it is complex, and it's ambiguous. So you don't want to leave succession planning to chance, or probably to a long period of time. I would recommend that if you can do it, you can carry out your succession plan activities annually. Anything less than that will be very worrisome in this time. So it's an encouragement that it should be something that should run periodically. You just agree on the period within your organization, and you'll be okay with it. Once you have the framework, it will be easy for you to keep carrying out your planning and identification of all these high potentials, high performance individual. The next thing we want to talk about is to quickly talk about the succession planning nuggets. All right. So, succession planning is not something that HR does alone. There is need for collaboration with other functional heads within the business, and as a matter of fact, there is need for executive buy-in. It needs to be owned by the leadership for it to command the respect it needs, because it's all about the continuity of the business and the achievement of the goals. As a matter of fact, anything that has got to do with talent should be taken seriously, because if one looks at what drives a so-called entity, it doesn't go beyond the strategy, organization, and the talent itself. There is need for a detailed job profile. So a situation whereby you don't have a detailed job profile, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to identify what competencies and what individuals will be required. You need to understand the job. Let me just put it like that. The job needs to be well detailed, even for the committees to be able to work. You need to have a competency framework, because with a competency framework, you can compare what is required with what you have in terms of as far as competencies within the organization. And with your competency framework, it becomes useful across different functional touch points within HR and as far as people is concerned. Organizational design is very important because if you remember, I did mention the bit whereby you need to map your competency framework to the grading system within your organization. If there is nothing like that within the organization, then how do you want to go about mapping it? That needs to be put in place. Organizational design entails a lot of things, so it goes even far beyond the grading, but within the context of what we're discussing, the grading system will suffice. The last one here is the Wenger style of grooming talent. How many of you still remember the former Arsenal manager? So his style of grooming unknown names to becoming star is very, very recommendable, highly recommendable, because what you're doing is periodically, annually, you're identifying your high potential, high performing staff, and you are trying to get them prepared for higher positions or higher challenges within your organization. So on that note, that brings us to the end of this course, and this is me wishing you the very best as you go ahead to design or work on your own succession plan for your organization. All the best.